I am very grateful that we have today a distinguished guest, the Minister for Youth and Children of Albania, Bora Muzhaqi. It's not by chance that we invited you, because you have implemented a lot of initiatives for youth participation, to strengthen youth participation, and I think it was in the preparation of this plenary session, it was really amazing to see that we can also learn from candidate countries. I think everyone was really amazed by the initiatives that you set. It's a pleasure having you here. We are really excited to listen from the experiences from Albania. Very warm welcome. The floor is yours.
Distinguished President of the European Economic and Social Committee, Mr. Röpke, dear Youth Coordinator, Ms. Biljana Syrakova, dear Vice President of the European Youth Forum, Elias, dear President of the ECC Youth Group, Katrina Letjane, dear young representatives, and dear honorable members of the ESC. I wanted to start by sharing something a little bit personal. When I was 14 years old, my school took a trip to the European Parliament. And up to this day, that remains an unforgettable trip for myself. Back then, Albania was not a candidate for accession, was not a candidate country, and Albanians required visas to travel to the EU. And I remember looking at the European Parliament and the very well-spoken European members of the Parliament as something that was very far away from the Albanian reality. It wasn't because the buildings were remarkable, nor because the people were highly educated and inspiring. Of course, that was true, but it was because the European Union and European Parliament represented for what it represented for us Albanians. The European Union represented freedom, democracy, equality, rule of law, economic and social progress, and of course, being part of Europe, not only geographically, but also politically. 20 years later, I rejoice that Albania has just undergone a very successful screening process. And together with my compatriots, we have aptly presented, chapter after chapter, the reforms and development led by our visionary Prime Minister Edi Rama for Albania 2030, the European Albania for our children and for our youth. And Albania has finally had its first intergovernmental conference with the EU. But I'm also particularly proud to be standing here today, 20 years later, representing Albania in a high-level debate on fostering youth engagement and advancing youth-oriented policies across Europe, in light of Albania's successful progress in the well-being of young people, to discuss, most importantly, youth choices for EU choices. So thank you, Mr. Röpke, for the opportunity to share Albania's example in building youth policy for youth with youth. Having said that, our law on youth was approved in 2019 and has currently been implemented for 5 years with its relevant bylaws, and it has created the conditions that are necessary for youth involvement, participation and empowerment, whilst also outlining the roles and responsibilities of both central and local institutions through emphasizing the cooperation with youth organizations. Our law on youth provides the preconditions for youth engagement in policy and decision-making, both in local and central government. More specifically, our law provides for the establishment of local youth councils consisting of young people from 3 target groups: high school pupils, 15 to 19 years old, students, 20 to 24 years old, and young professionals, 25 to 29, as well as the representatives from the youth CSOs of every region. These local youth councils are headed by the mayor of the municipality and serve as consultative bodies for local decision-making. And it's important to emphasize that they don't just serve as advisory bodies for youth policy, but for any policy, including budgetary decision-making. And I'm proud to announce that we currently have 61 functional local youth councils, compared to 8 that we had in 2021 when the institution of Minister of State for Youth and Children was created. 1 local youth council for each municipality of Albania, acting as an advisory body for our mayors, ensuring that youth is not only seen, but is also heard. And to talk about youth involvement in decision-making, certainly it doesn't stop at local level. It goes to all components of government, even governmental level. This is why we have a National Youth Council consisting of representatives of student councils and youth CSOs that act as advisory bodies to the minister responsible for youth, i.e. myself. And believe me, they're not an easy bunch, but the meetings with the National Youth Council are always enlightening and inspiring. However, before we had established our local youth councils and national youth council, we had no specific organized advisory boards of young people. And this is why, when we started drafting our national youth strategy, we had to do an ad hoc consulting with young people from every single region of Albania to ensure adequate representation as well as ensure tackling the real challenges of our young people. And our national youth strategy for 2022 to 2029 was developed after a year-long consultation process by engaging young people from every single one of our 61 municipalities, ensuring adequate representation of minorities, young people with disabilities, and a special focus on inclusion of young people coming from vulnerable communities. We didn't do it ourselves. We joined forces with the whole youth ecosystem in Albania, starting from EU programs, UN agencies, including youth CSOs and donors operating in this field, to ensure that all youth groups had at least one representative in each of our consultations. We co-authored the National Youth Strategy with 1,200 young people from high schools, universities, and young professionals, as well as 45 youth organizations and youth networks. And we focused on three main pillars: youth empowerment, innovation and skills enhancement, as well as youth well-being. And most importantly, our National Youth Strategy, not only was it co-authored with youth, but it's also co-monitored with youth. We conduct two types of evaluation for our National Youth Strategy: an institutional monitoring that includes all local and central government, as well as one outside monitoring, where we use the 8 standards of the European Youth Forum together with youth. And one last thing, another entity that is in the function of Albanian youth is the National Youth Agency, which provides supports to youth through the grant schemes dedicated to the youth CSOs. Based on our National Youth Strategy, the youth CSOs requested a say in this grant scheme, and they asked for increased transparency in our selection processes. But we do not just listen to youth, we take actions. And this is why, as of 3 years, we have adopted the LOD methodology with our evaluation process in the National Youth Agency grant scheme. And this grant scheme shares the decision-making between 3 entities: government, civil society, and donor representatives, thus making the grant scheme open and transparent, which has led to increased transparency and trust in the National Youth Agency, not only just youth and civil society, but also by the European Union that has granted the National Youth Agency the grant component of CSOs of the EU for Youth scheme to manage as per its grant regulation. So we look forward to implementing it next year and to attest to the great strides that the National Youth Agency has made in the past 3 years. And one more thing regarding the European Youth Forum. Last year, it analyzed over 150 countries in regards to basic human needs, foundations of well-being and opportunity. And whilst its results showed that a frozen progress for youth in Europe, Albania was one of those 3 countries that has had the most significant rate of improvement in the last 12 years. So thank you for that, and continue monitoring us to make sure that we're accountable for the job that we're doing. We cannot build the future for our youth, but we can build the youth for our future. This is an expression that I use very often, because I truly believe that with the work today with youth and for youth, we're building our youth for the future. We're teaching them the skills that they need for the jobs of the future. We're guiding them to safeguard against the dangers of artificial intelligence. We're advising them on how to cope with mental health issues. And we're empowering them to be leaders of the present to ensure that they inherit a sustainable and ecologically diverse planet. However, no matter how much we work for or invest on youth, we can always do more and need to do more. So with that, I will end by saying that despite the progress that I've outlined above, the list of requests I receive every day from youth for sport infrastructure, technology equipment, libraries, youth centers are a lot more than Albania's capabilities to finance. And this is why programs such as EU for Youth, EU for Schools, EU for Culture, Youth Guarantee, EU for Skills are so important for our country's youth. I strongly believe, and I can definitely prove as an economist, that the return on investment on youth is that of a risky investment, but without any actual risk. But the lives of youth that we change do not just affect the lives of these individuals, but they also affect the future of our planet. So having said that, the decisions we make with youth and the policies we enact for youth, the partnerships we forge with and for youth will have far-reaching consequences. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for this presentation, dear Minister.